I'm Dr. Ashish Sen from Mechanical Engineering. Professor Nagarajan is on leave, so I'm here to introduce the speaker. We have with us today Dr. Dhananjay Dendukri. He is an alumnus of IIT Madras, graduated in 1999 in chemical engineering. The title of the talk would be microfluidic technology for point of need diagnostics, experiences at a startup company. To talk about Dr. Dendukri, he is currently the CEO and co-founder of Achira Labs, a Bangalore-based startup that is building a microfluidic platform for point of care medical diagnostics. He received his PhD in chemical engineering from MIT in 2007 in the labs of Professor Patrick Doyle and Alan Hatton. There, his thesis work on synthesizing polymeric particles in microfluidic devices received the Centuria Prize as the best dissertation in the area of micro and nanotechnology at MIT in 2008. Prior to that, he obtained his master's in chemical engineering from University of Toronto in 2002, and he is a BTech in chemical engineering from IIT Madras. His other honors include an Institute Blue from IIT Madras in 1999 for his outstanding all-round performance. His work at Achira Labs was recently recognized through his being named as one of the 20 individuals to receive the MIT's Technology Review's prestigious TR 35 Hours in India. I'm sure all of us would get motivated by his talk, and his achievements and leadership skills would ignite some of the young people here. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Dhananjay Dendukri with a bouquet from one of our students.
Thank you. Come. Thanks.
Okay, so I would request Dr. Dhananjay to take the floor and deliver the talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashish. Very nice to be back in my alma mater and see all of you bright young faces. So what I'm hoping to do today is tell you about a little bit about microfluidics, a little bit about doing a startup company, and a little bit about building a business in this area. So I hope I'll be able to convey some things beyond just technology and science. So just a little bit of background to the company. We got started at the end of 2009, and our vision as a company is really to transform the market for medical diagnostics in India, which we believe there's a big unmet need through the development of new technology, specifically microfluidic-based platforms. We are funded by Nadathur Holdings, who are our angel investors, and Mr. Nadathur Raghavan is one of the co-founders of Infosys. And they have actually funded a number of interesting companies, a number of startup companies in the biotech space. In fact, if any of you read Economic Times, there's a cover story on Nadathur today. And the reason I'm mentioning them is that I think nothing would be possible without the support of investors, both with deep pockets and with an attitude to kind of wait it out for the long term, which has really been lacking so far in India. There's another co-founder, whose name is Suri Venkatachalam. We have about 20 people in the company today with diverse backgrounds in different aspects of science and engineering, and also some world-renowned scientific advisors. So a little bit of background, first of all, to diagnostics. And that picture there should tell you most of what I'm trying to say. And medical diagnostics is basically doing measurements on the body, but you can broadly classify it into two different areas, in vivo and in vitro diagnostics. So in vivo diagnostics, as you might imagine, is basically measurements made on a living body. So these could be all sorts of scans or x-rays and things of that nature. In vitro diagnostics is things that are done in a test tube, basically, or in a microfluidic chip. So you could take a blood sample or a urine sample, do it do a test of it offline. And there's several things that you could look for in an in vitro sample, in a blood sample, say. So broadly, you could be looking at a genetic kind of tests, which are nucleic acid tests. You could be looking at proteins like hormones, insulin, for example, or simple metabolites, sugar, urea, things like that. So those are broad classes of in vitro diagnostic tests. Now, one thing I'd like to bring your attention to is the following paradigm, where currently a lot of medical testing, as many of you might be aware, is done in centralized labs, right? So there are big laboratories that a doctor writes you a prescription and says, get XYZ tests done. You go to a large lab, they take usually about 1 or 2 ml of blood from here, and they will do a battery of tests and give you the results by the end of the day sometimes, or things could even take weeks, depending on the complexity of the tests. But there is a growing paradigm which is changing where these tests are being done from these centralized labs to the doctor's office and eventually to being done even at home. So we're already aware of this in some sense. Many of you have probably seen these home glucometers, if you have a diabetic in the family, and there's a lot of diabetics in India, you probably have seen these home glucometers. But imagine you could do a whole bunch of different tests at home. Then that would really change the way that healthcare is practiced. How many of you are aware of the X Prize, by the way? Yes, so, okay. So the X Prize is a radically new, promotes radically new ideas through giving out these really large prizes. And the X Prize Corporation, for example, funded these, a prize for building the first private craft to go to outer space. So that was a big competition that a number of people like, Larry Page and Bill Gates and all of these people funded teams. And now there is a company called Virgin Intergalactic that actually is booked, I think, for the next 2 or 3 years. And they're going to take, some 100 people who've paid about 50 lakhs each to go for the chance just to go to space for a few hours. And this Virgin Intergalactic was born out of this X Prize competition. And they really want to push the boundaries of science and technology. So the latest X Prize actually is in diagnostics. And again, any Star Trek fans here? If you've seen Dr. Spock carry something called a tricorder, which basically is able to do all sorts of diagnosis. Of course, it's science fiction at the time of Star Trek, but the X Prize is called the Tricorder Prize, simply because it's trying to do, or it wants people to do exactly what Dr. Spock could do in Star Trek. That is a whole variety of tests with something which is a handheld instrument. And this is a big prize that a number of people worldwide are now aspiring to do, to develop this sorts of whole batteries of home testing devices, ideally all integrated into one. In terms of market, because this is what companies are interested in, there's a whole variety of in vitro diagnostic tests, like I told you earlier, and these are broadly classified into, for example, clinical chemistry tests like glucose. There are immunoassays, which do proteins, hematology, which is basically cell counting kind of measurements, microbiology, which is basically smearing stuff on a plate, looking at it under a microscope, seeing if you have a malaria cell, for example. Then there's cancer kind of tests, histology, genetic tests, nucleic acid, and point of care tests. Now I want to bring the point of care to your attention because even from a market point of view, it's a huge category of tests, these home tests. So which is why a number of companies are interested in these tests that can be done at home. And right now, if you look at where the market is, it's really in North America and Europe. And India and China are very small markets for diagnostic and indeed for healthcare products. But as we're all aware, this is going to change in a decade from now. And I think the interesting opportunity is that for a number of companies in India, there's an access to a rapidly growing market which has its own needs that are different from the Western context. And that's what companies like Achira are trying to go after. So why diagnostics? Now, if you look at the current market for diagnostics, it's roughly in a developed market. The market for diagnostics is about 10% of the market for healthcare. So the market for drugs is obviously much larger. But I believe the role of diagnostics is going to expand in the time to come because of many reasons. One is just increasing access. As you have the ability to measure more, you will measure more. As you all know, as you have the ability to put more tweets or more Facebook posts on there, you tend to do that. So if you give people the capability and to check their health, I'm not talking about trivializing it, but in cases where it's really needed. For example, if there are people prone to cardiac arrest, there does need to be more constant monitoring of them, ideally non-invasively, such that we can figure out who are those people that need to get admitted to a hospital in time, for example. So there's going to be a lot of increased access to diagnostics, which is going to drive up the use of diagnostics. Further on, there's also a lot of new biology that we're discovering. So biology, as many of you may have heard, is considered to be the science of the 21st century. We probably know less about our bodies than a lot of the things around us. And as we discover more about our bodies, we'll find that we need to do a lot more measurements. To take the glucose example again, anybody who's doing diabetes research will tell you that glucose is actually a very, very crude measurement of the state of diabetes in your body. There are probably a whole bunch of other protein markers that can tell you more precisely what is going on inside you. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know enough biology and we don't know enough of those pathways to actually go and do those measurements. But as we discover more biology, thanks to the Human Genome Project and all of these sorts of projects, we will actually start wanting to measure more things. And finally, there is the more, at this point at least, science fiction vision of personalized therapeutics. That is, we will have tailored drugs that will be different for each one of us based on our own genetic makeup and so on. So that's a little further away, but all of these trends are simply leading to the fact that we need to measure a lot more. And if you look at technology trends in diagnostics, because that's something that's important for people in science and technology, one leads out from what I just said earlier, that we need to measure a lot more. So once upon a time, you had a small sample of blood, maybe you wanted to measure 2 or 3 things. But today, there are, for example, microRNA arrays where people want to measure 1,000 things from a small sample of blood. So in order to do that, there's a whole host of new technologies that are coming up that can enable these sorts of highly multiplexed measurements, multiple measurements from one small sample. So here's a picture, in fact, from work from my PhD thesis, where you make these barcoded particles. So these are micron-sized particles, each of which has a unique barcode on them. So we all know about barcodes at supermarkets and things, but how would you make a barcode that's so small that you can't even see it? So there's ways to do it using this technique called flow lithography, for example. And by doing that, you can then measure each one of these particles, which has a unique barcode and attached to a unique sensor, and then find out the information related to, say, 100 or 1,000 different analytes even. The other major trend is miniaturization. So this is an example of a miniaturized ultrasound, and you can see it's about the size of a smartphone. So you can do this very handily even in a field testing kind of mode. Of course, ultrasound has unfortunately different connotations in India where people use it for female infanticide. But I think in the US, for example, this sort of an instrument has become very popular. The other, I think, very interesting trend, especially to a lot of you who are looking across interdisciplinary areas, is the confluence of mobile technologies with healthcare. And I think this is going to be hugely important over the next decade. And mobiles, as you can imagine, are great platforms to do a lot of different things, from capturing images to data processing to actually connecting with the server and maybe giving healthcare advice to people, all of these different things. So this is actually from a company called Agamatrix in the US that has developed a small add-on to an iPhone. So what you can see on the right-hand side, there's a little plug-in that you put at the bottom of your iPhone, and then you have a glucose strip sticking out on the right-hand side. So you put a little finger prick of blood, and the value of your glucose measurement can appear on your phone. And there's a company called glucosebuddy.com, which is riding off of this and basically connecting all the people who are doing glucose measurements and saying, your friend in wherever is doing, he's got this sort of glucose profile and this is what he's eating, maybe you should do the same, and things like that. And so there's all sorts of interesting business models that are emerging from this sort of confluence of mobile and healthcare. And I think the other big technology trend is nucleic acid testing, because genetic testing is going to be hugely important. Right now, in the area of infectious diseases, where it's definitely very much needed. So there's a company called Cepheid, and what they've developed really is a sample in, answer out technology. So what does that mean? So ideally speaking, you want a technology to be easy enough that you can literally spit into a cup, put that cup into something, and it tells you, in this case, whether you have TB or not, and whether you have a certain more dangerous drug-resistant TB. So it's the simplicity that's very important to a final user. If you want to make these point-of-care diagnostics, that is really take them to a patient or to the field, they need to be very, very easy.